to today's episode of the Indoencers Podcast. Our guest is an established playback singer who is probably most well known for his prominent collaborations with music director Santhosh Narayanan. His first major step into music on the public scene came with reality TV, as he was a winner in A.R. Rahman sir's Ooh La 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 show, and as he was one of the stars in the second season of Vijay TV's Super Singer. Since then, he has had a busy journey in the film music scene primarily, contributing to the industry both as a singer and as a composer. I'm super excited to be speaking to the wonderful singer, composer, iconic Kavali whistler, and fellow blogger, Vijaynarain Rangarajan. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on.
It's an absolute pleasure to be on this. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. So just to start off, it's the question I really don't want to ask, but because of the times we're in, I've had to kind of been forced to ask on every episode. Partly because I started this whole platform in April of 2020, and that coincides with something that has happened globally, and that's the coronavirus pandemic. So inevitably, the first question of every episode has been, how has this pandemic affected you in terms of music and outside music as well? And you're in a different country compared to most of my previous guests. You're in Australia. I know that there was a lockdown or at least something like a lockdown until quite recently, if I'm not mistaken. So
yes,
it is correct. Something that continues to affect your life, I presume. So could you just speak on how the coronavirus pandemic affected your life in music and out of music? And perhaps if there are any positives you could take away from this unusual time.
Oh, absolutely. So you're spot on when you've said that, there is no escaping the impact of the pandemic, no matter what profession you're in. And being in two professions myself, it had an impact on both the professions that I was in. So it's been quite the journey since, I guess, even pre-COVID, right? So it all started when, I was doing work on this movie as a composer. It was my first movie and I was doing it in Sydney, and I'd sort of finished composing the songs and the background score was left. This was October 2019. And around that time I was working an IT job here. And I decided to, move out of that job, take a small break, go to India, work on the music for the movie, maybe for a month or so, and then come back to Sydney and see how things go, based on how the movie did and, how I felt about being a composer. And, if I really thought I had, more to give to the music community as a full-time musician, perhaps, because that was the first time I was actually going to leave a job and go do music full-time. So I wanted to try that out. I went to India in October, and I had actually not completely moved out of Sydney. So I was still renting an apartment here, and I thought, okay, you know what, let me go. It shouldn't take more than a month or two max. So it's fine. I'll just pay the rent and, I'll make that move, finish the movie, come back, and then see how it goes. Except that it took longer than I thought. And the movie, I think, released end of Jan, but then it was like 4 months. So November, December, January, and February. And so I was like, okay, that's a lot of rent that I'm paying for an apartment in Sydney. Sydney is not a cheap place to be renting in. So I thought, okay, you know what, let me bring my parents here for a vacation. We'll spend a month in Sydney and then, go around a few places. And after that, I'll just vacate, go back to India and do music for a year and see how it goes. Because, I just completed work on a movie and there was lots of learnings there. I was very comfortable composing songs, and background score was where I thought the challenge was. And so maybe I wanted to explore further options of, maybe doing just songs for movies, because I think that's something that comes naturally to me, composing melodies and being able to visualize them and arrange them. So yeah, so that happened, and I booked tickets, my return tickets. So we landed here in the first week of March, and I think it was the 4th or 5th day of landing here when they made an announcement saying India is locking down and you can't come back. And then Australia shut its borders. So I was basically stranded in Sydney with my parents, thankfully. And there was a lockdown for about 2 months here. It wasn't a harsh lockdown, to be honest with you. But yeah, it was early stages, and everyone was pretty unsure about what the pandemic had in store for them. Me, on the other hand, I had quit my job as well. So I had no source of income at that point. And there was literally, I think that was also the time when a lot of movie projects were being shelved and the entire industry sort of went into a pause mode. And so it was a no-brainer that, there was no doing full-time music, at least in the next few months, which meant I had to start looking for a job again. And for the first time in my 13-year career, I was actually without, like a full-time job and actually actively seeking work during what was probably the worst times to be looking for a job in any sector. So it took me a couple of months to actually land a job. And it was a blessing in disguise in that, earlier I used to do a lot of my vocal recordings remotely for Santhosh and for some other composers like Satyana. So, and I used to do that in Sydney, right? But I don't think people had warmed up yet to the concept of, a singer being just able to record remotely and sending files through Dropbox and all of that. But when the pandemic happened, I think this whole remote way of working really became the norm in a lot of industries, and music was no exception. And so I felt like, look, I actually have a better work-life balance in Australia, because here, it's like a 9 to 6 or 9 to 5 job. And then you've got the time for yourself after that. It's a quieter environment. And having worked in India, I knew that if I was moving back to India, there was no way I was going to work in IT. I was just going to do music and any other creative pursuits. There was just no way I was going to like spend 2 hours in commute and then, 10 hours doing a job and then coming back. It just drains you out. You can't do anything else. At least I am not, I don't have the grit, if you may, to pursue that dual career in India. So I felt like I could actually continue to do music in Australia while working. And I also realized a lot of things about what I really wanted from my music. And it's not just about, the commercial success. So there's a lot of ideas that I want to, cultivate and I want to explore and bring to life. And that can happen with or without it necessarily being on the bandwagon of a movie. And so that was one realization that I think happened thanks to the pandemic. I mean, it would have happened anyway, but I'm just glad I didn't spend like 1 year in India, maybe hustling or struggling and then figuring out that maybe this wasn't for me. Whereas now I'm in that nice space where I can do the kind of music that I want. I, in fact, recorded a few songs after that as well. And so, yeah, it is quite, like I said, there are ups and downs to it. I have been able to balance music and work rather well up till this point, and I kind of have hit that sweet spot where I know when and what I want to do in music. So I think that's been one of the revelations, and I know it's a highly privileged take that I'm saying here, because for a lot of full-time musicians, the pandemic was really a punch in the gut, because that was their livelihood and it's been affected badly. And so I would never advise someone to do what I did because obviously it's very easy to say all of this when you've got like a day job to go to and that pays your bills, right? So maybe what I would say is, yeah, if you can have like a side hustle or have a main hustle and make music your side hustle, or have multiple hustles. And I think a lot of people are already doing that anyway these days. So sorry, that's a really long answer to a question that you asked, but that's pretty much what happened during COVID. Now, the interesting part was Australia, especially Sydney, had the Delta outbreak just 4 months ago for the first time. I mean, we are technological laggards in certain ways. I mean, we've got like slow internet and whatnot, but we did lag behind even when it came to vaccinations and COVID. So we didn't have like, massive lockdowns, to be honest. Like the country had its international borders shut, but we were pretty much free when the rest of the world was locked down during a good part of last year. But what didn't happen was the vaccination wasn't ramped up in time. And so when the Delta strain actually came to Australia in June, a lot of the population wasn't vaccinated. So it took us like 3.5 months of harsh lockdown to actually get up to speed in terms of vaccination rates before everything opened up just 2 weeks ago. So those were rather harsh months, to be honest. I mean, my parents were back in India, thankfully. So it was just me having to deal with lockdown by myself. The initial few weeks were interesting because I was still exploring some of my musical ideas on Instagram and other things. But after that, it sort of, starts getting to you. It's just one of those things where, the lockdown has its impacts. So you do things to keep sane. So I think the second lockdown was, harsher, but I'm also quite proud of the way I've navigated it. So yeah, all good now. We're open. So I'm looking forward to what lies ahead.
Yeah, I think I've definitely enjoyed part of what you've had to put out on Instagram during.
There's more food than music, but yeah, that was another positive aspect, because I'm the kind of guy who would order takeaway food 5 out of 7 days, and it was completely reversed during the lockdown. I was like cooking almost every day. So
that's good. Yeah. I mean, I can't say anything. I can't cook, but It's
I
great if
can, and if
somebody
you
can
can.
cook.
Yeah, don't wait for a lockdown for you to get inspired to cook. That's all I'd say.
Yes,
Unsolicited advice there.
that's probably very good advice. So, away from lockdown and away from the present, I kind of like to take this back to the beginning and kind of walk the steps up until the present. So,
Sure.
let's go right back. So, just on a very general note, what's your first musical memory? What's your first memory relating to music?
The first musical memory, that's actually a very good question, because I interestingly have quite a vivid memory of listening to Anjali, the album, the Ilayaraja album. Now, okay, disclaimer, I'm going to say Ilayaraja and A.R. Rahman without saying Ilayaraja sir and Rahman sir, because they are like, Sachin Tendulkar to me. You don't say Sachin Tendulkar sir, you just say Tendulkar, right? So that's
Fair
how
enough.
they are. Yeah, so no offense. I mean, this is more out of, a respect for the levels that they are at. And doesn't matter if you've worked with them or not, they are untouchable idols right up there. So yeah, so Anjali was the first album I remember listening to in our Madras house. That and Preeti Sagar's nursery rhymes. I don't even know if a lot of people remember that, but those were the introductions to nursery rhymes. But it was more the music that struck me. I don't even remember the rhymes anymore, but yeah. And then Night Flight to Venus, the Boney M album. We had a cassette of that. So there was, I think that had Rasputin and Painter Man and a few other really good songs from the day. I don't know, it's a very peculiar thing. Like a lot of South Indian households at that time had Boney M cassettes for some reason. Like they may not have had the Beatles, but Boney M was like a mainstay of a lot of these households. I really don't know what that trend was, but I'm just glad I was exposed to it. Yeah, that's really my first musical memory. And then we moved to Delhi when I was quite young. Must have been 5 years old, I think. And around that time, there used to be the show called Super Hit Mukabla. If I remember correctly, I don't know who was hosting it, but yeah, Shah Rukh Khan was quite popular even then. There was a song called Ole Ole that I remember. And then dubbed versions of Rahman songs that used to make it, like, Mukkala Mukabla and all of that. And I used to make these annual trips to Bombay to visit my grandparents. One distinct memory I have from possibly 94 or 93 was being in a taxi in Bombay. What was the song? It was probably Mukkala Mukabla or some other song from the same album. Chikkabukkarayile, yes. Chikkabukkarayile playing in Tamil in the cab. So I was like, what's happening? Like, why is the Tamil song playing in Bombay? It just blew my mind back then. I didn't know who Rahman was at that time. Like, I was too naive to, understand what was going on. But the song. Like when you hear Chikkabukkarayile, you just know the song and you're like, wow, there's a Tamil song. And that, I don't know, it blew my mind back then. So yeah, some snippets of my earliest musical memories. Yeah.
Yeah, and as you kind of hinted at, I understand that you grew up in various places around India, Chennai, Delhi, Bombay, and Salem for a few years, if I'm correct. And
Yep.
I also understand that most of your exposure to, in terms of like film music or popular music in general, was mostly kind of Rahman sir's songs. So
Yes.
I'm just curious, you've lived in various cities. Did those various cities bring about any different musical influences, or was it just ARR in different languages all the way through?
That is a great question. So the funny part is ARR's music started having its impact on me only much later in life. Like I said, I was not actively paying attention to who was composing the music or whatever. So must have been like Tal and Dilse, and I think I call it the Rahman realization point. Like there is this point in life when every listener suddenly gets obsessed with Rahman's music and they start that journey of exploration. They go back to the old albums and they're like, what the hell's happening? And so for me, that was actually Lagan. It wasn't even like, any of his earlier albums. It was quite late, like I said. So, and around the same time, Dil Chahta Hai had also released, but Lagan was like the album for me where I was like, wow, okay, this is just magic, because it's a period movie and, there was no electronic instruments standing out in the album. I mean, obviously he's used electronic instruments in that, like there's pads and stuff, but then, there's no programmed stuff in that, right? I mean, you don't really hear any of those typical things. And I'm like, wow, how does he create this magic? And that really kick-started the journey of Rahman. In terms of influences from, growing up in these places, I actually started learning Carnatic music when we moved to Delhi. So I learned it for about 2 years in Delhi from Sri O.V. Subramaniam sir. So that's O.S. Tyagarajan's father.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
yeah, so they used to live in Delhi around the time, and so he was a wonderful guru. Like I have very fond memories of learning Carnatic music from him. So his grandson O.S. Mukundan and I used to sit in the same class, just the two of us, and he would teach us. So it used to be really nice. Like his house in Karol Bagh, and we used to go there and learn music, and then pick up copies of this magazine called Gokulam on the way back home with dad. So very fond memories. But then when we moved to Salem, I actually couldn't find a guru, funnily enough. And so most of my singing was restricted to whatever they taught in the school that I went to. And I was in Salem for a couple of years. So my music stopped then. And then we moved to Bombay. And in Bombay, I pursued Carnatic music again for another 2 years in Shanmukhananda Sabha. And then I reached year 10, and being Indian parents, I was like, okay, you know what, focus on your studies now. That happened, and I was actually quite obsessed with Carnatic music around the time. And after 10th, I moved to Chennai and I wanted to continue. And by that time, my guru, like O.V. Subramaniam sir, had moved to Madras and he had settled in Mambalam. But he was very old at that time. I still went to him for like classes for about 6 months. But then after that, again, year 12 and whatnot. So we just stopped. And my Carnatic music journey sort of ended there. And part of the reason why was also because my academics sort of took a hit. Like I've had this crests and troughs of academic brilliance. I wouldn't say all through my life. I was quite bright till like year 8. And then there was a bit of a dip. And then year 10, I was okay. And then year 11 was probably like the nadir where I was like not doing well at all. And it had to do with a lot of things. Like the school I went to was not a great place to be. And then, I was out of my comfort zone. My parents were in Bombay and I was in Chennai. So I think the whole displacement sort of took a toll. That was kind of the time when I was obsessed with Carnatic music as well. So there was this perception among my peers and my teachers that, I was too invested in music and therefore not concentrating on my studies, which may have been true, but it was also a lot of other factors. So my studies took a real bad hit at that time. Like I was in the bottom rung in the class. And I mean, even back then I knew it was very uncharacteristic for me because I wasn't bad at studying. It was just one of those things where, your mind's not in the right space. So I took a break from music, and right at the end of my 12th standard is when I actually did well. And my board exams were quite the surprise. Like my board exam marks were quite the surprise for my principal. Was like, how the hell did you get this? So I scored quite well. So, and then like everybody else, I joined engineering college. So there's a saying like in Tamil Nadu, you join engineering and then figure out what you want to do in life. So that's pretty much what I did. So I joined college, and then so the thing is the association back then with Carnatic music sort of became negative in my head, like because I was trying to hold on to it during a very bad phase in my life. And so I tried to stay away from it just to keep those memories at bay. And college was also the time when a lot of my classmates were into various forms of music. Like I got introduced to a lot of hard rock back then, like your AC/DCs and Whitesnake and Deep Purple, and yeah, you know the drill, right? So that was really fun. That was a fun phase. My college unfortunately didn't have a great band, so to speak. Like there were a bunch of people trying to put stuff together, but most of them had like classical background, and so yeah, we didn't quite have the kind of bands that some of the other colleges had. Some great musicians were there in my peer group in the other colleges. Like Flute Naveen used to play for I forgot what college he was in, but there were like a lot of really good musicians around there. So I would go to all these festivals and yearn for something like that, or yearn to be a part of that, but couldn't quite be in it. And to be honest, my singing wasn't great back then. Like I didn't know how to sing for film. Like all my training was just in Carnatic music. So if I were to sing a film song, I would make a very Carnatic rendition of it. And people would just say it sounds very it lacks the feel by which they mean dynamics and emotion.
Right,
so
right.
yeah, that was there. In terms of influences, sorry, I have to make this. So around 1998, when I was in Bombay, that was the time CDs were becoming more prominent. Like there was a transition from cassettes to CDs. And I had this friend who was quite well off, and he used to have a lot of CDs in his house. And his dad had great taste in music, which he sort of passed on to him. So he introduced me to a lot of good music. And this was also the time when like Backstreet Boys and Boyzone and Ricky Martin and all these guys were like really popular. So I was into that like mainstream pop. But at the same time, there was also a lot of other things. I can't quite remember, but there were a lot of good musicians that he was listening to. I think Marvin Gaye and Bob Marley and stuff. So yeah, those were some influences, and I think the indie pop revolution happened at the same time. Lots of good indie pop music. Colonial Cousins was a big influence. Like Hariharan sir is one of the idols that I look up to in terms of singing.
I'm
And
with you there.
sorry, yeah,
I'm with
absolutely,
you there. Yeah.
yeah.
Colonial
So,
Cousins, absolutely. Yeah.
and I have to thank my dad for that. Like one day he just got this Colonial Cousins cassette, and along with another ghazal cassette of Hariharan's. And I was like, what is this? Why have you got some random stuff? And then when I played it, I was hooked to it. Like Colonial Cousins was such a new sound back then. And the fact that, there is like Hariharan sir singing English in a perfectly Indian accent, but then nothing about it sounds off. Like we've got this mental picture of what an authentic English songs should sound like, because we've only heard like, music from America or other places in the West. But then when you have someone, singing Indian English, and it's quite intelligible, right? So you can actually make out what he's saying. And it's beautiful. Like it's such a well-produced album. It's held up so well even today. So that was a pretty big influence. And my introduction to ghazals was also Hariharan, thanks to, again, my dad getting one of these cassettes. And then I used to just pester him to get more. And I did listen to a lot of Carnatic music growing up. Like my household listened to a lot of Carnatic music. So yeah, like Maharajapuram Santanam. And then in the later years, Madurai Mani Iyer was a favorite for me. I used to listen to a lot of his music, especially his Chittaswarams were like really, like Kalpana Swaram, sorry.
Yeah.
They were like legendary. So yeah, when I was in that Carnatic zone, I used to try, to sing like him, or at least try to listen to a lot of his music for inspiration.
Yeah, and you brought up Carnatic music, and I mean, Carnatic music is like, as far as I'm aware, when you're a child, for the Indians I know, for the South Indians I know, like everybody does Carnatic music. It's kind of like a norm, and then people will give it up at different stages in life. But obviously for you, you had a very special kind of passion and also, capability and talent towards not only Carnatic music, but vocal performance in general. So, whether it's in terms of Carnatic music or music in general, when did you notice your passion and skill in terms of vocal performance?
I think my parents noticed that when I was quite young. I still remember them saying that I won some competition when I was in kindergarten, like some Bharatiyar singing competition. And they said that, I could sing in pitch, because like my family doesn't have any musicians in it. So as far as I know, I mean, they could probably sing, but no one pursued it. But so my parents enrolled me in music class, but looks like they were quite serious about the fact that I could sing. Like they did identify that talent in me. So they sent me to Carnatic class, and I was quite good at it at that time. So, but when I actually started taking it seriously, like I said, was when I was in like, I think my 11th standard. That's when I moved to Chennai, I would go to all these kacheris. Like I didn't realize the Carnatic music scene was that big in Madras, because I hadn't really lived my childhood in Madras. So it was quite the revelation. But when I really wanted to become a musician was when I started hearing about how, I mean, by that second year in college, I was already like this hardcore Rahman fan. I'd heard all of his albums, enough time to catch up and listen to everything he had composed by then. So I had done that, and I'd heard that, he would just pick raw talent out of nowhere and make them overnight superstars. And he was consistently doing them. Like every album, we would look for like somebody new in the credits, and we'd be like, wow, okay, this person's set for stardom now. And truly enough, they would go on to become amazing singers, or they were already amazing singers. They just needed Rahman to pluck them out of obscurity and put them out there. So that was inspiring. And the fact that he was this really humble guy who would work, he didn't seem to have any pretenses about who he was working with, or the kind of musicians that he wanted to work with. Like he would pick the most diverse of voices as well. So that sort of really inspired me. And I was like, okay, if I have to become a musician, it has to be by singing for Rahman. That should be my goal. Like my be all and end all was sing for Rahman, and that really was what drove me to anything that I was doing. Every time I would enter a competition or something, I would just be like, I hope somebody in this competition watches me and they know Rahman and they go tell Rahman about me. Like I think it's pretty much what every singer thinks.
Yeah.
At least he wants to sing for Rahman.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just curious to know. So when you came to Chennai in your 11th standard, if I'm correct, were you alone in Chennai?
So I was living with an aunt that I hadn't really known too well. like my aunt's family, that is.
Mm.
And she was also like a very, she was a Carnatic music enthusiast. So she would take me along to concerts and stuff. It was quite embarrassing because I wasn't really performing well in my studies, and I was living with them, and her kids were like performing really well. So they were doing well in studies, and you know how the competition goes, right? So all these things in my mind. So yeah, I guess it was the feeling of, it was the fact that I was away from my parents and not doing too well academically, but I was being recognized in school at the same time for my musical achievements, like winning competitions. Like the school would put me in front for any music competitions back then. So yeah, it was a weird time.
What were the sort of opportunities or musical opportunities you got in school like? Were they just like regular competitions or?
Yeah, they were just mostly like inter-school competitions, group singing competitions, and all of that. So my school was quite the, how do you call it? Like it was I went to a school called Jai Gopal Garodia Hindu Vidyalaya. So they used to take part in all these, what was it called? The Bharat Vikas Parishad competition. So this was like this inter-school competition of patriotic songs and such. So I remember being in this contest where this was a group singing competition where I had some solo parts, and the zonal winners would go on to enter a state, like a nationwide competition that was happening in Bombay. And because my parents were in Bombay at that time, I really wanted us to win. And we actually won the zonals, and we ended up going to Bombay. And I took all my friends to my place. I made them visit my parents, and they hosted all of my friends. We were probably at my house for like 2 hours, and with a lot of, because we had teachers with us, and we had like a couple of teachers whinging about it as well. So you know how it can be, right? The worst part was we ended up losing the contest really, really badly because I had a completely sore throat. I talk a lot, as you would have probably noticed by now. So I kept talking throughout the journey in the train because I was super excited to see my parents. That's all I cared about at that point, right? So, and when I actually sang in the competition, I pretty much croaked a couple of lines that were not in pitch, like my solo parts. And yeah, I still think that's probably the reason we lost the competition. So when we came back, usually when we used to go for these, the local ones, like the previous rounds, we would get the next day off just to relax, like take rest, because it was an intense competition.
Right.
When we came back after we lost in Bombay, our principal didn't give us the next day off. So she was like, yeah, come to school. So it was quite the funny time, I guess. But yeah, in terms of competitions, yes, that's pretty much what it was. During college, I used to try and participate in the big ones like Sarang, and I would lose all the time because, like I said, I was not a great singer. I really wanted to prove a point, but I couldn't at that time because I had no idea what dynamics were and, what non-Carnatic singing used to look like. I always used to think, songs that suit me are songs that are slightly classically based. So I would go about singing stuff like Kayil Midakum Kanavani and all of that. I mean, I love those songs, but they're probably not my strength. They weren't my, strengths at that time. So should have probably chosen better songs, but I have no regrets. I mean, they were competitions. Those are college competitions. There's only so much you can, read into those.
Yeah, and I mean, you've gone a very long way since then. So
yeah, yes.
Well, going from the competitions that may not have gone as well, let's move into a competition that did go quite well, and that's Ooh La La La. So, after you finished your bachelor degree, probably your first step into music on a public level was Ooh La La La. This is the reality show run by the one and only Rahman sir. My icon, your icon, everybody's icon. So I was going to ask what motivated you to join the competition, but unless you have an answer that's not ARA, sir, and I'm guessing that might be a bit of a useless question.
No, actually, there is another reason. I mean, obviously, yes, I saw ARR on the competition. It was like a band hunt by ARR, but I was sort of in a defeatist mode where I was like, well, there's no point. But then I had a classmate who was a guitarist, and he was like, hey, do you want to start a rock band and go to this competition and see how it goes? And he was a kind of guitarist who would, who would want like 4 out of 5 minutes in a song fronting the band and playing solos. So the vocalist would perform around him. This was all fine. I was like, well, yeah, let's give it a shot. What do we have to lose, right? And he pretty much put the band together. I was just supposed to be like the vocalist and composer, if you may. And so we did a few jams, and then he got Nritya Maria Andrews on board, who's a really good singer. And so she sort of became like the lead vocalist, and I was like the co-vocalist in that band. And yeah, we had no idea how we sounded, because that was really the first time I was in a band, and it was a 5-piece band. Sorry, there were 6 of us. So there was like guitars, bass, drums, vocals, and keyboards. Yes.
Right.
Like I said, we had absolutely no idea how we sounded, because we didn't have any other reference point at that point in time. But then when we went to the prelims, and we had like, Paul Jacob, who was one of the judges. Again, I had no idea who he was till that point. But then thanks to my ARR research, I knew that, Paul was one of those early, bandmates, groupies, whatever, with ARR at that point in time. So he's a, brilliant musician himself, and is an amazing guide. Like if you're a musician, you should definitely have a conversation with Paul Jacob. He's like one of those guys who can give you like superb insights into music. So we didn't know that back then, but we played, and we could see, Paul like shaking his head and, rocking out. And when the solo came, I started introducing the band, like, with a bit of flamboyance. I was like, yeah, on the guitars, it's this guy. On the drums, it's this one. And then right after everything ends, the audience erupts, everyone's clapping. This was German Hall in Tinagar, if I remember correctly. And so all of that happens, and then we come down. Paul calls me and says, never speak in the middle of a guitar solo. Like, okay. And like, you guys were amazing, you're through. And we were like, wow, okay, that was cool. And then, we just made through the next 2 rounds, and we actually lost the semifinals against, I believe it was Zinx, Anirudh's band.
Yeah.
Anirudh, Leon. Ooh La 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 was this contest where pretty much anybody who's somebody in the music scene today was probably a part of it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure like other musicians on the podcast have told you about Ooh La La, right? Yeah. So like there was Anirudh, Zinx, Keba, Kalyani, Prashant Techno, lots of people. Like you could keep naming people. You could like go back. Ujjaini was there. Yeah. So it was a beautiful experience, because there were a lot of really talented musicians that we were like getting to speak to at that point. And we were like sharing ideas over email and whatnot. Yeah, just checking out the other bands, checking out the competition, but at the same time making some friends back then. And oh yeah, Agam was one of those bands that we were like, wow, what the hell are these guys like? Agam was solid even back then. Like I had no idea they were just like a couple of years old when they joined the competition, or maybe less than that. Like they were quite a young band apparently at that time, but they didn't sound like that. Like they sounded proper professionals. So we lost to Zinx, and but even then it was quite an enriching experience, because we had like an amazing panel of judges back then. We had like, I think Kumaresh sir was a judge, H. Sridhar sir was a judge, the late H. Sridhar sir, legendary. And we got glimpses of A.R. Rahman sir, and that was actually the first time I got to take a pic with him. And then the competition ended. So the telecast wasn't much to speak about. Like not a lot of people saw it. It was just a half an hour, there were just half an hour episodes with really tiny edited versions of the performances. So that was quite disappointing. But then, people forgot about the show. We forgot about the show. Our band, in fact, kind of disintegrated right after. And it took us almost like, few more months. I believe there were some of the bands that were active at the time were like, pushing for the organizers to, announce the results and whatnot. Then one fine day, we got a call saying, come to this place. We've got like the final announcements. And because we already knew that there were like 3 bands in the finals or 2 bands in the finals that had performed. We're like, okay, why are we being called? And then they play this video clip where Rahman sir speaking about making 6 bands as joint winners. And we were one of the bands. And so we were like super thrilled. What it meant was that we would get to record our song in Rahman sir's studio. So we ended up doing that over the next year. And the album, I think, released a little bit after. But by that time, we had also like, done other things. Like I had been part of Super Singer by then, like it was 2009. So that was a really good experience, just in terms of the kind of music that it exposed me to, and pretty much what the Chennai scene looked like, the band scene looked like, and what it took to be a musician. Even then, I hadn't really, blossomed as a vocalist during the show. I was doing more of a supporting role, like I said. But then I had like decided to try out for Super Singer, and then that story was a long one. Like that just went on for like almost a year, and I just grew from strength to strength. you just realize and pick up things on the way, like when you're seeing other people do things. And that's also how I got like dynamics and, the whole emoting in the song thing. It just happened one day. I don't know if it's like the grace of God or what snapped, but suddenly I was like, oh, people were like, hey, you've got really good feel. And I'm like, wait, this is the exact opposite of what I used to hear from people in college. Like, okay, something's working. Guess I won't actively do something to ruin it, I guess. So that's how it went.
Yeah, and you touched on this earlier, but as one of the winners of Ooh La La La, you got to be part of an album released by Ramancer, where you presented an original composition called Onrai Servom. Took a bit of digging to find that, but managed to get there. So
you know what? So then you know what I mean. What I mean when I say that I completely lack dynamics in the vocals, right?
I'm pretty sure you've come a long way since then, and part of that was Super Singer. And yeah, so after Ooh La La La, as you mentioned, you started off with Super Singer. So, and I'm just curious because, I mean, you did say Ooh La 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 didn't quite do well in terms of publicity and commerciality and all that, but I'm sure you must have gotten at least some public attention from that. So, entering another public singing contest, was this sort of public attention something you felt you thrived off, or was it like an obstacle that you kind of had to overcome through experience?
To be very honest, there were no mobile phones or at least smartphones back then when there was Ooh La 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 happening. Mm-hmm. And like I said, it was barely half an hour with 2 minutes per band. So really there was no public attention. There was probably attention from the rest of the peer group and, from our friends and family because we told them about it. But I don't think even my classmates from college realized that I was part of the show, like Ooh La La La.
Oh, really?
Yeah, honestly, like nobody knew that I was in it. I guess it was completely the opposite with Super Singer because the first season had become like a super hit. I guess the first actual season of Super Singer was the Hindi one, right? In which Naresh had been picked, even though he didn't win it. ARR sir picked Naresh to sing My Lyric. That was actually the first ever edition of a show called Super Singer. And then, yeah, that was in Hindi. And then that became, Vijay TV started to do it in Tamil. What had happened was I had joined an IT company to work in. And I realized that one of my teammates was actually Vijay Krishnan, who he was my senior in Cognizant where I worked. He had made the top 5, I think, semifinals of Super Singer, the first edition. So I instantly recognized him and, I spoke to him. I'm like, hey, you're that guy. I'm like, yeah, I was there. So, I was pretty curious to understand what the experience was like for him. And then when the next announcement came, I told him, look, I'm thinking of trying out. Let's see what happens. And then I just went and recorded something. I think they had like an audition booth or something where I went and sang a song. And that was it. I wasn't really expecting that to go any further than that. To be very honest, I wasn't expecting to make the cut beyond like the first round or even the first round. But then Vijay actually gave me a lot of insights into how it works and, what to sing and what not to sing, how much to sing and all of that, because he had been through that grind not too long ago. So, and that helped me quite a bit. And it was surprising every time I actually cleared a round. Like I was surprised every time I cleared a round. But then after a while, you start to grow in confidence. Like, you just stop doubting yourself all the time. And you do start to. And you also kind of start understanding what works and what doesn't in a competition setting. So, there are some songs that people will be very picky about if you don't sing them well. And there are some other songs that don't probably require the same level of effort and nuance. But as long as you can belt them with a nice emotion and vibe, you'll probably make a good impression for an earlier round, right? So it's also about smart choices in terms of the songs that you're singing. And those were things that I think I learned. Now, it's not some kind of knowledge that's probably going to help someone in the long run from a musicianship perspective, but it was good to know back then. And I think I got quite some guidance from Vijay at that point. So, yeah. And yeah, it just happened that, I made it to the top 20. And from then it was like a televised episode, I guess 3 episodes a week, and we were on it all the time. and went on for almost a year. So that's really when I started, having attention from the public. And, I would take the train to work. It was a really long journey, and people on the train would like give me like, these looks. They wouldn't be quite sure if it was me, but then they would hesitate. Some people would just come and ask, hey, are you that guy? And then one of those rounds was when everything turned on its head for me. So I was just cruising along, and then I sang this English song, and everybody acted like that was like the best thing after toasted bread. And channels doing channel things. So yeah, they decided to hide that bit. I'm like, okay, I'm not complaining. Let's do it. So yeah, that it was a good journey. Again, lots of good singers in that show. I got a chance to meet a lot of playback singers through that show, because we would keep having guests.
Right.
And of course, the panel of judges, all of them had sung for Rahman. That's all I cared about that time. So yeah, you would get like good guidance from the likes of Srinivas sir, Unnikrishnan sir, and Sujata ma'am. So it was quite fun. Chinmay was a host, and she was a riot to be with back then. I think half the show, she left midway. Yeah, she was an amazing host, and she would have a great camaraderie with the contestants as well. So good times.
Yeah, and speaking about the competition, I kind of want to take something that happened and kind of blow it up into a larger conversation. And while preparing for this interview, I was going through your blog, and I figured there was an incident where there was an issue regarding the audience choosing to eliminate a really talented vocalist. And I'm not interested in digging into the specifics of this incident per se, but I think this leads to an interesting discussion about audience appreciation of music in general. And I always hear people talking about how, quote unquote, good music deserves to be appreciated more, and maybe how certain songs are getting greater reach than it deserves. So with the backdrop of the kind of incident that happened where a really capable vocalist was eliminated, and maybe a lot of sort of music inclined people thought the singer should have stayed, do you think musicians have a kind of responsibility to educate, may not be the right word, but influence listeners to appreciate certain types of music more than others? Or is this just a side effect of how music works?
Look, my opinion on this, to be honest with you, I don't remember which contestant or which particular person I was talking about in my blog back then, because as you would have probably noticed, it would have probably been like a really, like angsty rant, probably reflective of my age back then. So
no, to be fair, a lot of people, it was Ranjani, I believe.
Oh, okay, sure.
Yeah.
Ranjani's elimination was quite controversial at the time, I remember, because she is a fantastic singer. Look, I think my opinion on that has changed over time about whether musicianship or the quality of a musician should necessarily trump everything else and reach the audience, because I guess there's a certain hubris that comes with being an artist that makes you think that this is what the audience should be listening to, and the audience will quickly remind you that they are in control and not you. So it's like the market dictates what works and what doesn't. And I don't mean this in just a commercial term, like sense, like when I say market, I don't really mean a commercial market. What I'm just saying is that music means different things to different people that are consuming it, and not all of them, in fact most of them, don't necessarily need to know anything about music. For some it's the lyrics, for some it's just something about it which, as a musician, I may never be able to articulate what it is that works for them. And I mean, a good example is, I've sung Poi Vazhva, and during the lockdown, I've never really paid particular attention to that song as a success or a failure or whatever. But during the lockdown, during COVID, I had so many people reach out to me saying, that song pulled them through a difficult time, and that's been a song of hope and just gratitude, expressing their gratitude for me, to me, for singing it. And that's when I realized, it doesn't matter if you're singing the notes right, or if you're doing something about the music works for someone, and it may not be the reason that you think it is. So I guess that's what I mean when I say people decide what they want to like and what they don't want to like for various ways in which the music impacts them. And so as far as competitions are concerned, I just feel like, they're pointless beyond a certain level of filtering out, because every musician is unique. And what competitions largely do is make people sing covers of other songs. And so it's just about who performed the cover better, right? And on one day, it might be someone's good day and they might just do like a really good job of it when someone else might slip up. And so for that day, they perform that cover better. That's all there is to it, right? Again, that isn't to say that the audience will necessarily like the person that performed the cover better. And so as long as competitions are only judging people or musicians for their ability to perform existing songs well on stage live, I guess that's all the scope is. So it doesn't define them as a musician wholly. It's just like, a small part of who they are as a musician or who their identity is. Now, some people choose to use that as their entire identity and then just, stay in that mode where they're just going back, trying to win the contest and, maybe sing in films. At some point, I guess, for some people, the end goal might be singing in films. For some people, the end goal might be singing for a particular person. For some, it may be money and live shows. And so for me, it kept changing, right? I mean, the larger goal was always sing for Rahman, because when you sing for Rahman, everything else will come with it, fame and whatnot. And that's really what it used to be. But it's changed over time. And, there's a lot more that I derive from my music these days that has nothing to do with commercial singing. It may just be like, sitting with a guitar at home and trying to come up with like an outline for a tune that I may or may not ever convert into a song. But then, those moments that I spend with the guitar trying to work something out, that's quite meditative. And I think, I'm quite grateful that I'm able to do that. So that's I'm not saying I've reached Zen mode in music, but it's one of those things where I guess having seen the ups and downs, you have to quickly, or rather at some point, figure out what you want from the art. Otherwise it can take you to a very dark place in that, it could cause insecurity or keep you in a constant state of, worry, where you're like, okay, am I doing the right thing musically? As far as I'm concerned, I don't think there should be a right or wrong thing, or there shouldn't be like a right or wrong trajectory. Yes, of course, learning is absolutely important. Like just keep exploring, learning. And I'm also conscious that that's also not possible all the time for everyone, especially people, who are full-time in music. When you don't know that your, income is secure, you can't be spending a lot of time trying to cultivate your craft in a completely clear state of mind. So I absolutely acknowledge the challenges that it comes with. But this is just my perspective. So as far as competitions are concerned, yes, they can be a great platform to get somewhere, to get to know people and then network from there and, maybe get your break. But that shouldn't be what defines you as a musician. There are ups to it. The downs are the fact that, people will forget you after a year when the next season starts. No one's going to remember you. And I sort of made a conscious choice to not be associated, or rather not be known as the guy who was on that show or of that fame, right? So, and that was a decision I made out of personal choice. It was like, if people know me, they should know me for, say, a song that I've sung in a movie or a song that I've composed, or as a musician, and not just somebody who appeared on the show. And I don't know with what level of success I've achieved that now, but I guess I am on the right track as far as that's concerned.
You definitely are on the right track, because before I started preparing for this interview, I had no idea you were on Super Singer. So if that's anything to go by. Yeah, a couple of years after Super Singer happened, we had to move to Australia, which was originally intended to be a short-term stay, as I understand, but ended up being a long-term thing. And I think during September of last year, so I spoke to singer Darshana, whom you've actually sung with on Poi Vazhva, and she had to move to the US in spite of her singing career, which was taking off in India. And she was telling me that this shift required a lot of adaptation to keep her singing career going. She told me she had to learn, audio engineering and recording techniques and all that, so that she could keep her career going. Did you have to go through any such similar adaptations?
Not really, because I was always trying to compose and do stuff on the side. Can't say I was great at it, but that started with, I guess, I had a friend called Pratul when I was in college. He was in my building. So we used to be in this, bank quarters. My dad worked in a bank, so we were in bank quarters, and he was a geek who would like buy all these, PC Mag and all of these magazines that would come with a CD in the last page sleeve. And so I borrowed one of his CDs, and that had like a copy of Fruity Loops. I think it was version 4 or 3. And I started toying around with it, and it was quite an easy user interface back then. I had no idea what a MIDI keyboard was, but then it was one of those things where you could actually create a beat using the user interface, and you could start programming notes and stuff. So I spent like lots of hours on it when I was in college, and I would just play those songs and try to record them on a cassette by just placing I don't know if you're familiar with it, but you can actually like press the record button on your stereo deck on a cassette, and it would actually record it. I mean, if something's playing on a speaker and you placed your cassette deck next to it and press the record and play button together, it would write on top of the cassette. Basically, the speaker would act as a mic. So I would do that and show it to my friends in college using my Walkman. Yeah, it was fun times. The point I'm trying to make is I was always like actively trying to understand how the composing process works, even though I had no idea that a bass line was required for a song to sound full. I just knew there was something in it, but I didn't know it was bass. Till these softwares actually had like tracks for bass and whatnot. So I realized, okay, so this is what's there. And that's when I started paying attention to bass lines and Rahman songs and whatnot. I just knew it was a boom effect in a Rahman song, but I didn't know it was a bass, right? And then in my college, actually, there were a couple of music. There was this guy called Praveen Bala. So he is part of a composing trio called Praveen Prasann, and I forgot the name of the third person. So they did a few movies. I will look that up and send that to you offline. So yeah, Praveen was a fantastic programmer and arranger. So he composed a jingle for one of our college culturals, and I was blown away by the sounds. And I went to him and I just asked him, how did you do that? And so it turns out he was using Cubase. And back then it was just an obsession with the DAW without even knowing what it was, right? So it was just, oh, wow, this guy is using Cubase. I need to find out what Cubase is. Just that, I could have done the same thing in Fruity Loops with whatever synths and patches were available. But he had the sense to know what a VST plugin was. And he used a plugin called X-Phrase back then. Yeah, so he showed what plugins were, and he had a MIDI keyboard. So that's when I understood, okay, so whatever I've been like drawing with my hands, that can actually be done much more easily using a MIDI keyboard. But then I would need a sound card for that and whatnot. So it was just a lot of information to comprehend at that point. So I just continued doing stuff on FL Studio. But during Super Singer, I guess, was when I bought a sound card, one of those PCI sound cards that you plug into your CPU, and it's got like a MIDI port. So you can connect like a MIDI cable and then, hook it up with your regular keyboard, which has a MIDI out. So tried all of that, bought an SM58, like a Shure basic mic.
Yeah.
So, and installed Cubase. And I would rewire Cubase with Fruity Loops. So you could get like, both the DAWs working, and you could use beats from Fruity Loops while using the linear multi-track mode of Cubase to record stuff. So it was a process of self-discovery, but I was quite comfortable by that time, just recording vocals or, just creating like 4-track, 5-track songs back in the day. And when I moved to Sydney, by that time, I was also familiar with Logic, because a lot of the Logic loops had made it to films. And one of our pastimes would be to identify what loop was in what song. And I'm sure you know a lot of those, right? So
yes, I've been through that journey.
Yeah. Funnily enough, the plugin that I spoke about first, X-Phrase, that had a really popular loop that made its way to like more than one Rahman song and a couple of other non-Rahman songs as well. So yeah, it was quite fun times to say, hey, I know that. Wow, okay. And yeah, so I guess my uncle was responsible for me getting into Macs. Like he bought me a Mac when I went to B school. So I'm like, I guess I owe a lot to him in general. And so this was one of those things. So yeah, he got me a Mac and I installed Logic and I learned how to use it. And Logic's quite intuitive, as you know. So this was 2012, 2013. And I was reasonably familiar with that. So when I moved to Sydney, it wasn't a hard thing to be able to record at home. So the transition was quite smooth. Now, the decision itself to move to Sydney, well, that wasn't something that I had to think a lot about in terms of how that would affect my music, simply because I had like a really big student loan that I had to pay off, and going to Sydney looked like the best option at the time.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, you moved to Australia, and this is kind of when your playback career did take off, as you established a really formidable connection with music director Santhosh Narayanan. And there have been so many incredible songs between the two of you. So I'm just curious to know, like, what do you think makes the combination click? Is it a personal connection? Is there some sort of musical connection, or perhaps a combination of both? What do you think it is?
I think it's a lot of factors, to be honest. I mean, I was a huge fan of Santhosh music without actually ever having met him. Because when I was in B school is when Attakati released. And I had briefly sung for Pradeep, Kalyani and Co. in Harmonized Project in a couple of live shows. Because Pradeep, I believe, was busy doing Yodaka at the time, Yodaka or La Pongal. And so they needed a vocalist for Harmonized Project. So myself, Shakti Shri, Harshita, Kalyani, and Rohit Fernandez, yeah, we were part of we were the Harmonized Project for, I think, 1 or 2 shows. We had a blast doing it, and I had huge respect for Pradeep and Kalyani and Co at that time, because they're incredible musicians, right? And so when I heard Santhosh, I was like, wow, okay, this is in the same mold. And then I realized they were all like part of the same community of musicians, like collaborating with each other and growing together at the time. And it was just brilliant. I was a fan then. So I needed no introduction to Santosh's music when I actually met him. What also happened was, I believe there was, Sean Roldan, Pradeep, and all of these guys used to do this jam at Besant Nagar Beach. They used to call it street music back then. They tried bringing the busking culture to Chennai. So they did like a few jams. And I just happened to attend one of those. And I performed one of my own compositions then as well. And Santhosh and his wife were actually there at the time. And I remember being introduced to him, and I just said hi, and that was it. Right. So that's all there was to it. And I went back home. And then when I actually came to Sydney, Santosh's wife, Meenakshi Akka, she messaged me on Facebook. And she said, hey, I didn't realize you're in Sydney. We should catch up. I'm also in Sydney. And I was like, hang on, who is this? I didn't know she was his wife. So like, sorry, have we met? I'm like, yeah, I'm Santhosh Narayanan's wife. We met in Chennai. Do you remember? Like, oh yeah, okay. Sure, let's meet up. And then when I actually met Santhosh, I mean, it wasn't like meeting Rahman. Like I would have been, super conscious and whatnot. But Santhosh is the kind of guy who, he's fun to hang around with. So he's quite down to earth and whatnot. So he had no airs about him, and I felt quite comfortable. And I guess we just started off on a very informal note, not talking about music at all. Like we were just talking about random things, and we also share a very similar kind of humor. So like, yeah, we have a penchant for like terrible jokes. So I guess that's where we really bonded. So, and once that happened, the music was quite easy to work on. In fact, the first ever recording that I did for Santhosh was I had just gone to watch him record strings at one of the studios in Sydney. That's actually what he was here for. And this was for Muppatharu Vayadinile. So he was recording strings for something, and he just asked me to jump into the chorus box with Kalyani. Kalyani was visiting Sydney at the time. And we did the chorus for the happy song in that movie. So the birthday song, right? So I sang in that, and that was actually the first ever time I sang for Santhosh. And I'm like, okay, that was all right. I mean, I wasn't quite happy with the way I had sung it at the time. Like I was a bit pitchy. And then he said he was doing Irdi Sutra. So he called me home once. And he used to live quite far from where I was in Sydney. So I would take like the train, which was an hour's journey to his place. And he would come to the station and pick me up. So I went to his house and I heard the song, and he asked me to sing a few lines and, do some tracks, like, layers. And all of that went quite well. And then one day he then went back to India, and we had bonded really well by then. So we were like, just like friends basically. And I had no expectations out of, music as such from him or anyone for that reason. So I was like, okay, cool. If it works, it works. But this is good. Like, it's just good to know that, there's someone from the music community, someone I really respect, who is actually able to come to Sydney, and I'm still connected in music, to music in some way. So that was a really good thing. So one day Santhosh called me from India, and he was like, hey, you have your SM58, right? And I had my mic here, like my Shure SM58, and I had like a Focusrite 2i2 sound card, which I still have. And I'm like, hey, so I'll send you a Logic project. Can you just record the same line, like, 4 times and send it back to me quickly? I just need like some layers on this. And so that was part of Maya Visai. Like I had already done the choruses, but there was those lines that go, so those lines. Like, okay, cool. And I thought, I had done like chorus in that song. But then when the song released, I realized she had actually retained just my voice for those parts, and it credited me as a singer. I was quite elated. So I guess that was my moment. Like you could say that was really my first playback singing moment in a big movie. I had sung for like other composers by then. Like I'd had like songs released for other composers, but typically what would happen is, I guess it had to do with image as far as a singer goes, right? So people also want singers that the audience knows. So I would sing a song, and then they would also add like a couple of other known singers to the song, just to make sure that, their names featured prominently, and, their voices were also there. So eventually I would end up becoming like the third voice in a song. So, whereas this song is where I could distinctly hear myself, and I was like, yeah, there you go. Song says you've sung it, you've actually sung it, and it's in a Madhavan movie. What more do you want? So that really worked well. I went to India for the premiere, and yeah, we hit it off from then. It's been a wild and amazing journey till now. I had the pleasure of singing some of the best songs that he's composed, and in some absolutely amazing movies. I'm very grateful to Santhosh and Meenaka for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with that. To be fair, you can also hear, I think, at least mildly, your voice in songs like Ele Kichan. I believe you have done chorus for that. So yes. I mean, yeah, chorus for Rahman sir. that's definitely.
Yeah, I did do a lot of chorus for Rahman sir. But the thing with doing chorus for Rahman sir is that I never really got to meet him like one-on-one. There must have been a couple of sessions during Endiran when he was behind the console and there were like 20 of us doing the chorus. But yeah, there was never a situation where he was just there with me in the studio and he asked me to try out something. I get dreams about that kind of a scenario even today, but that's not happened yet. Someday. Ele Kicha, the funny part was I actually sang those lines that you hear, like the Vale Kondale bits. Even though he was not there, I guess Krishna Chetan or someone was there in the studio and they recorded us, and Maniratnam sir was there. So I sang those lines, and then Suchit Sureshan was with me. So he sang the Ema Sila bits. And then, I mean, a lot of other recordings happened on that song. And I really wasn't expecting my voice to feature there, but it did, like it made the cut to the song. So I think I got credited as a backing vocalist in the album, but I know that it's my voice that's there in those, Vale Kondale bits.
Yeah, and we just touched on your relationship with Santhosh Narayanan sir, and you became a music director yourself with the film Dagalti. So just in general, was getting into music direction something that, you kind of always wanted to do, or did this opportunity kind of come out of nowhere and you just jumped on it?
I always wanted to compose my own songs and, put them out, whether in movies or otherwise. I still want to do that. Like, I want to express myself as a musician, as a composer. I am not the best when it comes to writing lyrics and expressing myself lyrically, but I can come up with tunes and concepts for songs. And I have like friends that I collaborate with to get lyrics written. Like Subbu is one of my close friends who writes my lyrics for me. So with Dagalti, it was the latter. So it just came out of the blue, and I owe it to editor Suresh. So he contacted me on Twitter once. Actually, what had happened was Santhosh from Think Music, I had met him at an interview that I was giving at a radio station. The interview was to do with Irdi Chutru, the song that I had sung, Maya Visay. And at the time, the anchor, I think, asked me to perform one of my original compositions. And when I was doing it, Think Music's Santhosh happened to be there. And he was like, hey, so I didn't know you composed. And we just got introduced quickly. He took my number. And then looks like, he got in touch with me, asking me to send me some of his compositions so he could pitch to, or he could like look out for opportunities. And I did that. And turns out one of the songs that I sent to him, Suresh had happened to hear it, editor Suresh. And so he reached out to me on Twitter and he said, hey, I'm Suresh. I've worked on these movies. And he's worked on a lot of amazing movies himself. And he's like, would you be interested in composing for a movie that my friend is directing? And like, okay, let's give it a go. And it took a while. It took almost a year for things to materialize, but then it did. And I was quite the surprise. So it was great. And Dagalti just happened like that. And I made it very clear at that time that, I would be composing the songs from Sydney. I will make a couple of trips to India, but I will work remotely. And only if you're okay with that, we can go ahead with this. And, they were quite cooperative. So it was great.
Yeah. And you obviously did a lot of work as a singer up to that point, singing for other composers before you got into music direction yourself. So was there anything that you consciously took or learned from composers like Santhosh Narayanan as you were getting into music direction yourself?
Yeah, look, everything's a learning process. And Santhosh was a mentor of sorts when it came to figuring out what works and what doesn't when it comes to movies. Because you do need that big sound. Like, it's one thing to record just vocals with a guitar and, make it sound good. It's a song. Like you sing something on a guitar, it's a song. but you can't just keep doing that throughout a movie, right? You need a movie to have songs that are punchy, depending on the situation, of course. And Dagalti was the kind of movie that was like a proper commercial entertainer, like it was meant to be that. And so I did need a big sound. And, while I do have like reasonably decent sequencing and arranging skills, there are times when you have to like, reach out to people and collaborate on certain things. And so, in terms of artist selection or in terms of just nailing that sound, Santhosh gave me a lot of guidance in that. So yeah, that really worked well. And I think I also drew from a lot of influences that I listened to. I listened to a wide variety of music. So I had certain things in mind that I wanted to, bring out. And I also wanted to try and collaborate with musicians based in Sydney if I could. And I did manage to get a few of them on board for the movie as well. So it was sort of like an experimental project for me as well. So, I didn't treat it as a make or break thing as far as my film career was concerned. I was like, okay, I've got this. Let's see what best I can do with this. That's, that works for the movie. But at the same time, I also get to try out various things and, learn from it. So I think to that end, I was able to achieve that.
Yeah, and something that I find interesting, you obviously with this project sort of became a singer turned music director. And often when a singer turns into a composer, particularly in the film scene, since the singer is so used to looking at music through the prism of their own voice, like it can be difficult to move away from that. So like, and I don't mean this as a criticism, I just mean it as, a kind of inclination that is completely understandable. For example, when Sid Sriram turned into composer for the film Manam Kottatam, he sang, I think, 5 out of 6 songs in the album. Yeah. And like everyone loved it yeah, because everyone loves his voice. But, when a singer turns into a composer, sometimes it can be hard to look at it from the perspective of another voice. And, compared to somebody like Sid, the number of songs you've sung in this album is relatively low. It's only Padan, if I'm correct. So yeah. I'm just curious, was it ever difficult to see a song in another voice? Did you have to consciously talk to people and try to understand how something might sound in somebody else's voice?
I did have to do that because the thing is, when I compose, I just sing everything myself, including the female parts, right? And then after a while, you need that perspective. You just need to know how it sounds in someone else's voice. So I did try out a lot of singers for some of the songs, like Kotta Kotta the Bodha, for instance. But then I was very clear about, the fact that I would only sing as many songs as the movie would require, in the sense that, I had decided to sing Pare Pare, and Pare Pare was sort of like a narrator perspective and not sung in first person, right? So that was one thing. So once I become that narrator, then I can't also become the protagonist in the movie. So if the protagonist is singing a solo line, then I can't be the same person singing that. I mean, that sort of, deviates from the motive. That's how I was looking at it. So, and therefore, when in Alia, the male voice is actually Santhanam's character singing it, it couldn't be my voice. So I had to get someone else who could sing that. And the only other challenge I had was Kotta Kotta the Bodha, which was like this song where, in fact, that was one of my independent songs where it was meant for a completely different purpose. It was more laid back, it was like a neo soul D'Angelo kind of a vibe for the song, but it changed into something completely different, which was fun. I was open to the idea of toying with that. So what happens was it's like two voices, like a voice of reason and the devil's voice in the hero's head that's challenging each other. And then there's also the protagonist's imagination of the female's voice, because like what would the girl say, having because he would have wronged her at that point, so a bit of guilt as well. So that was something where I wanted, and the protagonist is drunk, of course, so it's like you get your best realizations when you're drunk, sort of a song. And I needed like a fun voice and a serious voice, but at the same time the whole movie is a comedy, so you can't like have like a too brooding a voice and whatnot. So I actually want to get Anirudh and Santhosh to do this. It would have been like an amazing combination, right? And see, again, the choice was very easy that I couldn't be singing it because I can't be the protagonist's voice. Right. So yeah, I wanted Anirudh and Santhosh, but Anirudh was really busy with the Rajni movie at the time. So, but he was very sweet about it. I mean, I've known Anirudh since Ooh La La time. So, and Santhosh actually suggested Govind Vasant. I was like, hey, why don't you try this guy? He's like, really good. And I texted him, and Govind was like, yeah, sure, bro, let's do it. Like, I mean, I really wasn't expecting him to, be so cool about it.
Mhm.
And he literally just rocked up to the recording in like a day's notice, and we finished it. So it was a great experience. What was the last song? That was it, right? I
Edomaya.
mean, Yedamaya was a female solo. So
Right.
that was in fact a last minute addition. I wish the song
Oh,
had
really?
done better. Like, I wish I could have used the song better, or, probably just not used it in the movie. But yeah, and the opening, there was a theme, right? The one that
Right.
Arivu did. Again, so I was looking for something punchy for the trailer, and Santhosh said, "Hey, try Arivu out. Here's this new guy. He's a great rapper. Try him out." And all I had to tell Arivu was, dude, this guy is a dagalti. So he's like a charlatan who does like random things. Because at the time I didn't have like much to go on as far as a teaser cut was concerned. And this was
Mhm.
supposed to be music for a teaser. They said, look, I've got this arrangement. This is a guy who tricks people, and that's all I know. Go for it. And he wrote the lyrics in like an hour, and he just recorded everything and sent it to me. I was just blown away. I sent it to the director, and then they decided to completely redo the teaser based on what I had sent them. So that's how it turned out. And again, it was never meant to be in the movie. It was just meant to be like a teaser theme that ended up becoming a song, or rather a
Mhm.
track in the album. So that's how that happened. So yeah, I guess the short answer to your question is, I was just looking at what role should my voice play as far as the characters are concerned. And I just happened to choose Pare Pare because that's my preferred style of composing and singing. Like if I were to do an independent album, my songs would probably sound more like Pare Pare than Kota Kota the Border. So, and that's the kind of song that I would like to be singing. So I guess that's why I chose that for myself.
Mhm.
In fact, I was toying around with getting Shankar Mahadevan sir to do that.
Oh, wow.
Well, they didn't have the connects or the budget at the time, so I decided to
Ah,
go ahead myself.
I see, I see. Yeah, Paren Paren is definitely the kind of indie band kind of vibe for
Yep.
sure. Yeah. So yeah, just kind of wrapping things up and kind of touching on a few other things. As a blogger myself, at least
I haven't blogged in what I don't know. You would be able to tell me how many years have I not blogged in?
you did post this Udit Narayanan thing.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I
right.
think it was last year, if I'm correct.
Yes, that was
Yes.
more of a Twitter thread that I just pasted into the blog because I
Right,
remembered
right.
I had a blog. But yeah, I was just like, in one of those moods where I was listening to Udit Narayan, and I was like, wow, this man is like perennially happy. He's like the Ted Lasso of singers.
Yeah, I'm just curious, what got you into blogging?
The lack of other social media platforms back then, and
Oh,
I always used to think I had a flair for writing. I don't know if that's true, but I just used to like penning thoughts down. I think I did that even before I was a musician. So it had nothing to do with my music. I would blog about the most random of things. There's a lot of posts that I've taken down in my blog from my blog. But yeah, I was blogging from the days it used to be called Blogspot. Writing's one of those things that I used to enjoy. I still enjoy it, but I just don't do it as often. I should get around to it. I mean, I've always thought that, in life I would end up writing a book. I have no idea what it would be about, but it's one of those things. It's one of those things that you realize as a child, you want to do this.
Well, whatever it's about, you can guarantee a customer here. So just shoot me a message when it's coming out.
Thanks, right?
Like obviously you've done a lot of blogging. You also had a publication on First Post on the
Yeah.
music of Kabali. Is that something that you might pursue, or was that just kind of a one-time thing?
So one of my friends was an editor at First Post, and she asked me if I could write something about it at the time.
Mm.
And I just jumped on it because, well, writing was fun. I just did it as a one-off.
Mm.
I would definitely be interested in doing it if somebody thought that I would be good at it, and they were willing to give me that responsibility. So I guess it's also about belief. Like, I mean, even with singing, right? So Santhosh sort of believed in me, and that's one of the things he does. Like, he doesn't go after brands or names. He's
Mm.
like, well, this person's good, and then once he decides, he likes your voice or it suits his song, then he will make sure that he makes you understand what you're bringing to the table for that song. So then you start to believe in yourself, and you start to know what your responsibility is towards that song and what you want to deliver. So I think that's a great thing that I have learned from him. You have to make your stakeholders believe in you. That's really important. If somebody believes that I can write something, and it can be I used to want to write music reviews. You may have seen a few in my blog, and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can Yeah, they would have been like all mostly like Rahman fanboy or disappointments or celebrities. But yeah, I used to want to become a music reviewer, but then that there were people doing it better than me, like Millie Blog and Music Aloud and all these guys. So I'm like, okay, you guys do your thing. I'm just gonna like do what I'm good at now for now.
So, just in general, what does the future hold for you? Is there anything you're working on that you'd like to share?
I've been working on a set of songs for the past 10 years. Yeah, well, like I said, there's bouts of inspiration when I do something. I record an idea, and sometimes it's actually like a fully formed song, but it's just that I don't sit and produce and create a roadmap for what the soundscape for the song should be and how do I release it and whatnot. And I've just watched like different waves of the music industry changing, lots of things happening. So earlier I wanted to use movies as a vehicle for a couple of the songs that I've got, whereas now I'm like, okay, look, there's a reasonably good uptake for independent music these days, so might as well just self-produce and publish on Spotify or something. So yeah, eventually I hope to do that. I do have a concept album that I'm thinking about doing, and some of these songs would feature in that. Again, every time somebody asks this question, I feel quite guilty for actually not having worked enough all these years to bring out even a single song. But yeah, hopefully in the next year or two, you'll see original music from me. And I do intend to continue singing in films or any other collaborations that people want to do. I've also found, making like, the kind of random Instagram stuff that I've posted off late. I've been quite enjoying that. So not going to look at it as a serious avenue of content creation, but I would like to, incorporate like music and humor and do something with it, maybe.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'll definitely be looking forward to an independent album if that does come out soon. And I'm sure many of the listeners will be. And obviously, we've spoken a lot. And obviously, the reason why you're basically here is because you're a wonderful, wonderful vocalist that's touched millions of hearts over the
Thank you.
years. And I don't know if it's too late or if your neighbors might get angry, but would it be possible, perhaps, a tune or two? So, just a quick note here. Unfortunately, he had another commitment right after this interview, so we didn't do the singing during the interview, but he was extremely kind and he took time off to sing a couple of tunes and send it over to me afterwards. So, I'll include them here. The three songs presented here. The first one is, all of you probably know it, it's Suzhali from the film Kodi, starring Dhanush. The song is composed by Santhosh Narayanan, one of Vijaynarain's biggest hits for sure, and so he sung that for us. The second song is an original composition of his. Only the Hindi version, called Malik Tu Hai, is out publicly, but he's actually working on a Tamil version right now, so he sent a bit of that to us. And the third song is Azhagiya Soodana, a song composed by Rahman sir from the film Kangral Kaise, which he's well known for singing on Super Singer. So huge thanks to Vijaynarain for taking the time to do this, and here are the songs.
Suzhali, அழகி விலகி களகட்டி போறவளே இருடி திருடி அழகுட்டித்தான் நகரும் அரளி நொரதள்ளிப்போன வெக்கம் கொரடி ஓ வயசத்தான் தித்திப்பா தின்ன உசிரத்தான் கத்தி சொன்ன பொட்ட கோழி அழகுல என்ன கொத்தி அலையிற விட்டா கொஞ்சம் பொழைக்கிற விடுடி முட்டை ஓட்டு மனசுல கண்ண தூக்கி எறிகிற திட்டா எட்டி சதறுற எரளி சுழலி திறந்தே இருக்கும் முந்தன் வாசலில் தானே துறந்தேன் சந்தேகங்களை அங்கே நானே தீரா வினைகள் என்னை சூழுவதாலே தஞ்சம் வந்தேன் எங்கள் ஷிரடி சாயே என் கூவல் கேளாயையா ஆ சொல்லும் மந்திரம் ஸ்வர்க்கம் சேர்ப்பவன் நீயே, செல்லும் பாதையும் சேரும் கோயிலும் நீயே, சிலையுள்ளில் சத்திய சக்தியும் நீயே, சுவாமியும் நீயே, சதுகுரு நீயே, சாயி 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 சாயி. அருவிகள் மேலே நோக்கி பாய்ந்திடுதே, மலைகளும் துள்ளி துள்ளி நடந்திடுதே, எனக்கே அறிமுகம் செய்தாய், எனக்கே அறிமுகம் செய்தாய். அழகிய சென்றல்லா சென்றல்லா மீண்டும் வந்தாள், அவள் வந்து நெஞ்செல்லாம் நெஞ்செல்லாம் லட்சம் மின்னல் தந்தாள். முதல் முறை பெண்ணின் வாசம் வீசுதே, முதல் முறை முக்தி நிலை வந்ததே. ஓ என்னை எனக்கேதான் நீ அறிமுகம் செய்தாய், உன்னை எனக்குள்ளே விதைக்கவும் செய்தாய். ஒன்றா ரெண்டா எந்த அவஸ்தை, அழகிய சென்றல்லா சென்றல்லா மீண்டும் வந்தாள், அவள் வந்து நெஞ்செல்லாம் நெஞ்செல்லாம் லட்சம் மின்னல் தந்தாள்.
And just one final question that I ask to every guest that comes on. It's nothing too special, but what's on your playlist?
What's on my current playlist? A bit of Mehdi Hassan, A.R. Rahman, obviously, but older A.R. Rahman, none of the newer stuff, to be honest. Like, mostly like 90s and 2000s Rahman. Nora Jones, a couple of Nora Jones songs. Then I've got what have I been listening to? Dodi.
Okay.
Artist called Dodi, of course. And what's on my playlist? I've got a few playlists. A fair bit of like neo soul and R&B, I guess. And a little bit of James Blake, John Mayer, and some Hindustani Natya Sangeet and stuff. Vasantrao Deshpande, Pandit Vasantrao Deshpande, and Jitendra Abhisheki. Yeah, I think and a bit of bossa nova. Yes, I mean,
okay.
Again, I got introduced to bossa nova by the fact that Pradeep did a bossa nova Carnatic fusion album called Yodaka. Draws heavily from bossa nova, right? So,
right.
Like, what the hell is this genre? And then I started discovering Tom Jobim and his collaborations with Frank Sinatra, and then Gilberto, Astrid Gilberto, and all these. And I recently got a nylon guitar during the lockdown, and I tried to learn some bossa nova chords. Failed miserably, so I'll probably attempt it again sometime. Yeah, my playlist is quite varied. It depends upon the mood, but it's mostly this.
All right. Sounds great. Thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. It's late at night in Australia, as I understand it, but thank you so much for your time, and thank you to the listeners for tuning in. I'll leave all of Vijaynarain's social media links and streaming links in the description, so make sure to go check all that out and make sure to follow him on all of the relevant platforms. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure.
Well, that was Vijaynarain on our 13th episode of the Indoencers Podcast, and thank you to everyone that has tuned in. You can find us at the Indoencers, spelled THEINDOENCERS, on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, or you can use the links in the description. Likewise, you can find our homepage at theindoencers.wordpress.com or through the link in the description. Make sure to subscribe to the Indoencers Podcast on your favorite podcasting platform. Thank you once again, and we'll see you next time.